Okay, this editorial is specifically about CNAs. This is going to cover the CNAs from all three nursing homes I was at, as far as things they've done, not done, etc. Um, the when I talk about a good CNA, I'm talking about a CNA who does her job well, does her job, does it well, etc. When I talk about a bad CNA, I'm not talking about CNAs that necessarily do things that are against the law, or do things that they know, like stealing. That's not included. I'm talking about CNAs who they're just bad at their job. That's a bad CNA. Someone who steals or whatever, that's just a criminal. So I'm not even going to include those, because if I were to say the worst CNA and that was part of it, then I would have to say that the worst CNA would be in the Decatur, River City nursing home. That was well, there's two of them that assaulted me, committed crimes. They were criminals, basically. They were both fired instantly that day, right after I said something. They were gone. But I'm not going to count those. So these are just CNAs that aren't very good at their job. CNAs that are good at their job, like excel at their job. And then you have your in the middle of the road CNAs. There goes that yawning again. Sorry, folks. Let's see. Well, as far as the middle of the road CNAs, honestly, well, they're like everywhere, but the uh, the nursing home I was in up in Indiana, even though the procedures that they went through and everything were correct and better than these other two nursing homes I've been at, the CNAs themselves were like, I don't know, middle of the road. None of them really excelled at their job. The job that they did was acceptable, and that's pretty much it. You know, I've known CNAs who excel at their job. They do things, above and beyond. Um, but now I've heard lately that possibly the one CNA I'm thinking of, um, as far as the best CNA that I've seen, I don't know if what she did was because she's a good CNA or because she was afraid of me getting angry about what she wasn't doing. Because I've heard from one of the worst CNAs that I've known ever that that's why this other really good CNA doesn't want to work with me. Um, and it has nothing to do with what I was told. It's because she was afraid I was going to get mad about something. And the thing of it is, I've not really yelled at her very much because she's such a damn good CNA. Um, even though we don't, I guess we don't get along very good anymore. She's still, I have to admit, she's probably the best CNA I've ever seen in all three nursing homes. Well, except for maybe, well, she wasn't really a CNA. That there was a nurse over in Huntsville Hospital that was just had it together. She knew what she was doing. She was probably on par, as far as she was good, she was quick, she knew exactly what should have been done. You know, she was just a very good CNA, even though she was filling in basically because they were shorthanded at the time. She was filling in for a CNA. she was still probably one of the top couple of CNAs I've ever seen. And the girl here that I'm talking about, yeah, she was up there too. Well, I should say was, because it depends on whether it was because she thought I'd get mad at her or not. Because if what she did was just what she does, I've seen her with other people, and she seems to be, you know, friendly with them, even friendlier than she ever was with me, really. And so I assume that she does at least what she did, what I've seen her do with them, which makes her a damn good CNA. Now, I've done a lot of basically, I mean, I've done some reviews of this place, some vlogs of this place that you can find under the playlist on the site or on my YouTube channel called Windsor House. That's the nursing home I'm currently in. But this is actually an editorial. I'm going to separate those out to where one is really like a vlog or whatever of Windsor House, and then the ones that I think, because otherwise I'm just gonna have so many videos about Windsor House under my editorials playlist that's kind of ridiculous. So what I'm gonna do is do editorials about specific, like the CNAs, or an editorial about the nurses, or an editorial about the staff or whatever. You know, and then but then under my vlogs, I'm gonna go into detail about the day to day, you know, goings on, the ridiculous stuff, you know, and it would be something that would be repetitive in those videos. Like I might say the same thing over and over again. It's just a different CNA, you know, a little bit different circumstances, whatever. That would be under my playlist under Windsor House. Whereas when I'm grouping it together like I am now, it's going to be under my editorials. So that's the way I'm going to do it now. And right now, and then if I like do another editorial about CNAs, I'll take this video out. Unless there's a reason to leave it in, but probably not, because everything that's in this one will basically be in the other one. It's just if I have to add to it, that's what it'll do. I can't believe I'm yawning again. Every time I start talking, it's like it's got to be because I don't talk to people. And with the MS hug and all that, added in there, it just I end up yawning because I've, you know, interruption of the breathing and all that. So what I realize is that one of the things that all of the CNAs do, the good and the bad, that they should realize is that being any kind of employee, you don't you don't gossip. You know, well, you can gossip in a regular work environment. You can, not that you should, but you can. But in this type of an environment, or a hospital, you know, anything like that, where you're dealing with, or a restaurant even, well, a restaurant, that would be kind of short term. Any place where where you have employees that are dealing long term with the same clients, basically, you shouldn't be talking smack about anything that's going on between you as an employee and that person as a client. Because if that gets around, these other people that you work with have to deal with that client as well. And in this environment, it's especially bad because some of us will be here for years. Some of us will only be here for days and aren't really aware of anything, you know, unfortunately. But some of us will be here for quite some time. You know, I talked to some people out here who have been here. You know, they walk around with a cane. They're actually more mobile than I am. Um, they just have other health issues, I guess, that have them here. Um, I was just checking the heater came on to see if it's showing up on my meter or not. So, one of the things that I've had a problem with that I had to go to the director of nursing about here was the fact that a good CNA told other people about some kind of issue she had with me, and it got around. And I've heard that from 4 different CNAs now. What she said, not what she said. I wish I knew what she said, but that she said that she's not working with me anymore. Some of them do know what she said, but they won't tell me. Some of them don't know what they said. They only know that she won't work with me. And in particular, I'm talking about the best CNA and the worst CNA. One of the worst CNAs here. And there are other worse bad CNAs that are bad CNAs for different reasons than why she's a bad CNA. And I'm going to get into that a little bit in this video. But I'm starting off with this part. This is like when I was in the military, we learned you never dress down a lower enlisted in front of other lower enlisteds. You always take them to the side. You always have a private conversation with them. If you're talking to another supervisor, you let them handle it. You say nothing. And that's the way that the CNAs here should have handled it. She should have gone and said, hey, look, I have to talk to you, and talk to a nurse. And instead of doing it right there in front of everybody, took her aside into a room, had a little conversation, did whatever. Nobody should have known anything other than whatever was going on between the CNA and her boss. That way, the other CNAs, you don't have a problem with them not wanting to work with one of the residents. I still wish I kind of cover this in the other videos anyway, but I still wish I knew what the hell she said, because I've heard different stories now, several different stories about what she really was talking about, and I wish I knew what she said so I could, know what the hell is going on, I guess. But that was one thing, and that's really the only real bad thing about her. But it's not just her; it's everybody here, really. Well, it's mostly females here, and I think females just gossip. They talk to each other. And when I was in the military, that was a huge no-no. You didn't talk in front of anybody. You didn't let anybody know what was going on. You kept that to yourself. You handled it in private, that kind of thing. They don't do that here. Here, it's like, by the end of an hour, everybody in the building knows everything that's happened. And that's not the way it should be. Shouldn't be that way at all. You're a professional now. You should handle yourself in a professional manner. You're not just some gossiping, hen that goes around clucking and, just does stuff just to make some money. You're a professional now. Somebody who, I mean, even when I was a pipe layer, that job, even though I was at the bottom man of the totem pole, I was still a professional. I was a professional pipe layer. When I was a printer, I was a professional printer. I've had jobs where I was a dirt bag, low man on the totem pole, like when I worked at a McDonald's. Now, my wife at the time, she was a professional in McDonald's because she was a manager. I was just one of the flunkies that flipped burgers at the time, so I was nobody. Even in that environment, probably because I know I've had to do it before. Yeah, I still took someone aside. I didn't tell everybody what had happened. A guy spit on a hamburger. I saw him do it, and I talked to my wife's boss, who was, ran the store. My wife was a shift manager, and she was about to get her own store, but that's a whole other thing. But I didn't tell everybody, hey, that guy spit on someone's hamburger. You know, um, I just told the boss, and he fired him for like a week and then hired him back. I never understood what happened there, but I guess the guy said I lied. I don't know. And then he had to give him the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, so there's a difference between the jobs you are. You know, you can be a gossip at some jobs, and there's some jobs you just can't because it affects, like in this environment, it affects my treatment. Because now I have a bunch of CNAs that I can't have work here. You know, because they're not going to come in here. They're not going to answer call lights. They're not going to give me the kind of treatment I should have. So she should have kept that to herself. If you had an issue, fine, handle that with your boss. I don't know what the hell the issue would be. Um, Other than just not doing your job. Now, if she has a personality conflict, like she thinks that I'm just too angry or something, that's fine. But, you know, at the same time, I've covered this in other videos. You know, there's a reason for that. That's medically induced. My short fuse is because of my medical condition, which is why I'm here, which is why I need CNAs and nurses. So, you know, that's just part of it. I could have a personality change and become, you know, the nicest guy in the world. And then I could have a personality change where I become even more of a grump ass than I am now. That's just part of it. And I have to deal with it. And, you know, all of the medical professionals around me have to deal with it too because that's their job. From the CNA to the nurse, the LPNs, the nurse practitioners, the doctor, they all have to deal with it because it's their job. If every one of them said, you know what, you're an asshole, I'm not going to deal with you, I'd be out on the street with no medication because nobody wants to. They just have a personality conflict with me. They're not going to deal with me. No, you don't do that. That's part of your job. So you have people that don't want to do their job. And for some reason, the management, probably because it's just they're short staffed. You know, I think if they had plenty of people and they had, you know, resumes waiting, and this was a damn good place and all, you know, they would probably these people would have been fired over and over again for, you know, just some of the smaller stuff they did. Some have done some pretty serious, like they could go to prison stuff, and some have done some smaller stuff. Um, the the go to prison stuff, that would be my word against his, basically. I'm thinking of somebody in particular. But I mean, if he wants to lie, go for it, lie. You know, perjure yourself all you want, or tell the truth and get fired, and probably have his certification removed. He'd probably be pumping gas somewhere after that. There's another nothing job as working in a convenience store. Well, pumping gas. I pumped gas when I was 18, back when you still pump people's gas. And that was a nothing job. You know, that was one where you gossip. Nobody cared, you know. But not here. You can't do that. So that's that part. I've already talked that to death. The one thing that makes, I'm going to talk about multiple CNAs here, that makes them bad CNAs, which I've covered in like some of the videos, well, all the videos about CNAs specifically that I've talked in the past. But really, what it comes down to is bad habits is the middle of the road CNAs, the ones that aren't really that good, who don't do things that they should do, or do things wrong, you know, that kind of thing. That's from bad habits. And those bad habits could have been taught to them when they were younger, but they're still bad habits. You know, these CNAs, I don't understand why these CNAs don't know what their job is. The only thing that I seem to understand is that they know they have to do check and change. They know, like, if somebody, I guess, throws up, they have to clean it. But that's here at the other at the River City Center, which is in Decatur. It's like a county over. I was in that nursing home for a while. They wouldn't do that. They'd call housekeeping. This was their situation. It was actually in the room across the hall from me. And this woman kept getting up and she would take a leak on the floor. It wasn't puke, it was, urine. And she'd take a leak on the floor. And I saw her one time. She just stood up out of her wheelchair and opened her legs and just went right there on the floor and then sat back down. And then a CNA had heard her, walked up because she heard the splashing. Walked up and said, "Did you just pee on the floor?" And she said, "No, I don't know where that water came from." And I'm like, "Oh my God." She just did that. Well, the CNA knew what it was. CNA said, "I'm not cleaning that up. We'll have to have housekeeping do it." Well, then housekeeping came down. And they said, "That's urine. I'm not supposed to clean that up. I'm not touching it." So that urine just stayed there for, I think it was, I can't remember if it completely dried because she got up and did it again. I think had almost completely dried when she got up and she did it again. This time the CNA came because it hadn't been cleaned up. It just reeked of urine over there. And this woman was crazy. She was psychotic. Psychotic, is that the word for it? I forget. Because over there, they let crazy people in. Because that's where, instead of insane asylums, I guess they've closed them all here in Alabama. And now where they hold those types of people is in nursing homes. And we had a few of them over there in River City Center who were schizophrenia. That's what she had. She had schizophrenia. So she'd talk to people that weren't there and stuff. She'd yell at them. Sure. And then for some reason, she'd get up and take a leak on the floor. She'd have nothing on underneath her gown, and she would just stand up and take a leak on the floor. As I recall, she did that one time because the CNA wouldn't give her clothes to wear. So she thought she'd get back at her by being on the floor. But I don't know about this time in particular because nothing like that came up. This is only another time that something similar happened. Except that when she went in there and said, "Did you just, go on the floor?" She said, "Well, if you'd give me some clothes, blah, 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 blah," that kind of thing. But this time she went on the floor. The second time she went on the floor, the CNA went and got a whole bunch of towels and threw them on the floor to soak the urine out. And picked up the towels and she put those away. That way, the housekeeping wouldn't know that there was urine on the floor when they came by to mop. And I'm thinking to myself, that means that housekeeper is going to walk into somebody else's room and the urine that she just mopped up is now going to be mixed into the water and spread around on the floor in the next person's room. Because as soon as she puts that mop in the bucket, now every single room she goes to after that's going to have that woman's urine on it. That should be a whole separate mop. That should be like, this is the mop we use when people do things that are not supposed to do. And that's what you use, and then you have another mop you come behind that with. You clean it up with the one mop and then you actually sanitize with the other mop. That's how it should be done. Not this whole, well, we'll use the same mop for 2 weeks after we clean up this blood or urine or whatever. I don't think that they should be doing that. I personally, I'm not a medical professional. I don't know. But based on what they said, as far as, like everywhere else other than River City Center, it's supposed to be, their CNAs have to clean up if it's bodily fluids or by anything like that. Anything that's a biohazard, it's supposed to be cleaned up by a CNA. And then housekeeping comes in and they just do the regular cleanup. But the CNA has to clean and sanitize the area. That's the way it's always been, as long as it's a biohazard. All right. Well, over in River City Center, the CNAs just didn't want to do it. They weren't going to do it. They would make it seem like there was nothing unusual until housekeeping came through. And, I was like, well, that explains why it smells like urine in my room because they've probably cleaned up, a half dozen people's urine with this same mop that they're mopping my floor with. So, yeah, that happened. It probably happens here, and I don't really smell it here like I did over there. Over there, I was like, why does it always smell funny around here? You know, it's not really like that here. But they put some kind of spray on the floor here on the mop. I don't know if that sanitizes it or what, but they seem to do a better job one way or the other. Um, but there's a good example of CNAs not wanting to do their job. It's their job. They don't want to have to clean up. And really, from my standpoint, all it's about is really them bending over. They don't want to bend over. Now, a lot of these girls over there in River City Center, in particular, let me think for a minute. Yeah, there might have been, no, every one of them was a big girl, so they probably had problems bending over or getting on their knees, but the thing is, that's part of your job. If it's part of your job, you need to make sure you can still do it. If you have to go and get like knee pads and keep them in your locker so that you can get down there and sanitize or do whatever you have to do, then that's what you do. You make sure that you have overcome whatever reasons there are why you can't do your job completely, so that you can do your job completely. You don't just say, I can't get down there. I'm not going to do that, leave it to somebody else, because now you've propagated an issue throughout the entire building. That one in particular. You got urine that goes in the mop goes in the bucket, and that person goes and mops the entire building. Now you've got urine in the offices, you've got urine in all of the other people's houses, residents' rooms or whatever. Every place that they use a mop gets that woman's bodily fluids spread around. And if it's like I heard CNA's here talking about, they had to clean up some blood. Well, I think blood would show up because it has that red hue to it. But once you cleaned it up, let's say you use a rag and you wipe it up, you still have whatever was in there, but you can't see it now because it's not red. But there's a film left on the floor of whatever was in that person's blood. If that person had, was it Hep C or whatever, that's on the floor now. If they had Hep B, Hep C, that's on the floor now. Now I don't know, because I'm not a medical person, how long Hep C and Hep B lives in that environment. I don't know, because I know there's certain things that they just can't live for more than a few seconds on a cool, dry surface like that. But there are some things that can live, like we know, what we find out with Ebola and all these weird bugs that we find in the Amazon and in the ice. Something can live like for thousands of years without having being in an environment that they need to thrive. They just kind of go into a stasis mode. I don't know if that's what Hep C and Hep B does. I think it has something to do with bacteria versus a virus. I don't know. Something like that. And I don't know which is which as far as Hep C and Hep B goes. But that's just an example. You have this woman, you've cleaned up all of the red stuff, but you still have a film which that um housekeeping is going to come in and mop that floor. And then they're going to mop everyone else's floors. So if there's something on that floor, residue from one of those people that can be spread as an infection or what have you, now you the whole building has it. And that's why CNAs have to clean their hands when they enter and leave a room. That's why they have to wear gloves all the time. That's why that whole cross contamination thing comes into play. That's exactly what that is. That's cross contamination. When somebody has something on the floor and then the housekeeping comes and mops it, that's exactly what that is. That's cross contamination. And they have big time rules as far as that's concerned. Now, you have CNAs like that are that bad that they have cross contamination because they would rather that than have to bend over. Um, you have CNAs that just don't want to do part of their job because, in their opinion, they shouldn't have to. You know, have CNAs who, well, they're the one CNA. Well, there's a CNA here. Let me think. Was there one at River City Center too? Well, there was this. There's CNAs like this. They're all people who work. Period. That what they do is they try. My dad calls it they huck fin somebody. And what happens is that the CNAs, River City or even here, both places, what they do is because they don't want to have to work, they get somebody else to come with them. And in some cases, like if they can't, like I can turn over by myself as long as I have handrails, right? That's what I'm holding right now is a handrail to pull myself over. All right. If I have handrails, I can roll over. Well, some people can't. So they have to have two people there so that they can roll the person over when they're changing them, cleaning them, whatever. Me, they don't have to do that, so they can have just one CNA work here. But I've had CNAs bring someone else in here with them, and then they stand there. Now my CNA will be let's call him or her CNA. Let's use different. No, CNA number one is my CNA. This is how it works now. You have a CNA assigned to you. That's the person who's supposed to come and see what you need, etc. All right. Then you have CNA number two, who is the one that CNA number one went and had come in the room to help them. Then CNA number one stands there and talks to CNA number two the entire time that CNA number two is the one actually doing her job. And CNA number one is doing nothing but standing there and talking to her and maybe putting her hand on the resident's hip when he's rolled over or something, like she's really doing something. Now, with some residents, I'm sure that's the case, but with me, as long as I roll over correctly, you're not really doing anything except resting your hand on my butt. That's all you're doing. And talking to the CNA who's actually doing some work. Well, that happens far too much, and it's always the same ones over and over again that do that. Like when they have to put me in a chair or put me in the bed, they have to use a lift to do it, and they have to put like they call it a pad, but it's like a hammock kind of thing to put me back and forth. Well, that means they have to roll me to put it under, then they roll me the other way to pull it the rest of the way, right? Well, usually it's CNA number two that's doing all of that. CNA number one's just putting their hand on my butt like she's pretending to hold me there. And then when it comes time to use the lift, CNA number one bring the lift over and then she'll pretend she's doing something while CNA number two goes around and starts to hook you up. Well, she might even help you. CNA one might actually hook you up, but then she'll go like over to the sink or something and pretend she's doing something. While CNA number two says, well, the heck with this, we got to get this done, right? And then walks around and starts lifting you up. So CNA number one ends up doing nothing really. And then CNA number two will put you over, like I'm using myself as an example, like over the chair. And then CNA number one will come over like she's going to help you get in the chair, even though you can get in the chair without her being there at all. I mean, she did help for a few seconds until I grabbed the arms of my chair. And then after that, she doesn't even have to touch me. I'm fine. There have been times where I'm like just looking at this person who's acting like they're doing a lot and they're really like, They're not doing anything. If they let go, I wouldn't even move except where the lift is letting me down in the chair because I'm holding myself there. So I don't understand that business. It's really weird. But that's an example of things that are just rampant around here. It's not just this place, but nursing homes. And well, it's everywhere you work. Really, you always have people that are trying to fuck off. They're trying to get away with shit. They're trying to not do their job. But in this environment, I would expect that more so in an environment where you're pumping gas or working at McDonald's, one of them jobs, than a professional environment. When you're in a professional environment, you expect people to be of a higher tier, and they're not. Well, some of them aren't. Some of them are no different than the people that you worked with, you know, pumping gas or flipping burgers. They're the same. They're trying to get out of as much work as they can. And then some of them, the worst ones, are the ones that are really loud and pretend to joke around with everybody when all they're really doing is trying to get out of work. Or all they're really doing is trying to get on somebody's good side so that they can get out of work. That kind of thing. I can't stand people like that. Well, I shouldn't say that because it's not that I can't stand the person necessarily. I just can't stand that some people do that, I guess is a better way of putting it, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're going to do a job, do the best you can at that job. That's the way I've always looked at it. If I can't do the best I can because I just don't like the job, then I find another job that I can do my best at. Even if it has to do with flipping burgers, because I was one of the best at flipping burgers. Not at the beginning, but I did it for a couple of years. By the time I could cook hundreds of burgers in just minutes, and dress them all out myself because I was one of the best after a little bit. So if even if no matter how demeaning the job is, if you're okay with the job and doing your best, do your best. If you can't do your best, then find another job that you can do your best at. And I'm not saying that because to be facetious or whatever, or to be mean. I'm just saying that that means that you don't like the job, you know, um, not for other people, but for yourself. If you don't like a job, then it's going to be, there's that old saying that you never work a day in your life if you enjoy what you do. That's what I'm talking about. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, then find something else to do, whether it be, being a nature photographer or a model or, that person that goes out there and counts trees or whatever for a logging company or somebody who works at McDonald's or somebody who's a nurse instead of a CNA. I don't know what it is, but you need to change what you're doing. And that's a lot of CNAs need to do that. On top of that, when it comes to medical field, well, it's a few fields. Like I could think of in the mechanic field, a mechanic that's like that. It's going to affect the customer as well. In this particular environment, when a CNA or a nurse or whoever doesn't want to really do their job, you pay for it. The resident pays the price for that because the resident has to put up with what that individual is not doing. And if that individual is supposed to be doing that, there's a reason why. And that reason usually comes down to the resident needs somebody to do that. So if they're not going to do it, then obviously the resident is paying the price. So, there's a CNA. Well, there's multiples. There's multiple CNAs that need to retire because they've just gotten so old and so decrepit that they just need to retire, but they won't. Now, that might be because they have to have the money or whatever. But what they don't seem to realize is that what they're not doing is affecting the residents. I've been affected by people like this. And I'm actually, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think I'm higher functioning than a lot of these people, even though I am crippled, I have to have a wheelchair. But I am, like, I do a lot of things. I take my own tray out now. And really, I do that because of CNAs that don't come in and to get the tray because they're not doing their job. So I have to do it. And I've, especially this last week. And I think this has to do with something somebody said in front of people that she shouldn't have, because it's always the same CNAs that don't bother to come in here. They don't come in here at all if they don't have to. And that seems to be the same ones all the time. And that includes things like picking up my tray. And they figure they can just leave it here because the next shift will pick it up, or when I get my next meal, they'll pick it up then, whoever's working then. And that's not the case. I'm the one who has to sit here with, and usually I only eat one or two things out of a meal, and so I'm leaving like cabbage or, spinach or something else in the tray. So that's sitting there getting ripe and starting to stink by the time, you know, I've actually had someone leave a dinner tray. Actually, almost every day this week, I've had to take my dinner tray out, which means if I didn't do that, that dinner tray stays until breakfast the next morning. That's like, what is that? 12, 13, 14 hours later. So for 14 hours, that cabbage is sitting in a, tray, and whatever else is there, all for 14 hours just sitting there stinking up the joint. Now, you would think that somebody on, what would that be? That would be second shift. Well, the only thing between there and breakfast is third shift. There was a couple of nights ago, we didn't even have a CNA at all on third shift. So there was nobody here to empty urinals, there's nothing, So if I hadn't taken that tray out myself, that tray would have sat here definitely. There was nobody to take it out of here until the next morning at breakfast. Now, the nurse might have taken it out of here, but I want to say that I took it out because the nurse walked in, saw the tray, and left again. Did not take it out of here. But I think that was more like at 8:30 or 9, something like that. And I finally got up. This was, I think, the first night I took the tray out. It might have been the second night I took it out. But, I saw that nobody was going to take that tray, not even the nurse, or might have been a med tech. Whoever came in and gave me my medication that night, after dinner. I ended up having to take it out there. And then I went, this happened twice now. I went out there and I said, did somebody already take? And I already knew the answer to this, but I wanted them to think about it, which they did. They didn't care. But I went and said, did somebody already take the rack back to the kitchen? Yeah. Just put your tray up here. So I put my tray up on the corner. I think an hour later, at least, because I was up after that one of the nights. There was an hour later, I went out there to see if they put the snacks out or something, and my tray was still sitting up on the nurse's station. What the hell? After an hour, nobody could even take it off the nurse's station and take it up to the kitchen. But that's the way it was. That's the way some of these CNAs are. Now, I got to say, and I probably should have said this in the beginning. Yeah, I did. I might have said it in the beginning. But some of these CNAs, no, I know I did. Some of the CNAs I do like. And like I said before, it's really not that I think that bad people, they've just been taught bad habits or they've picked up bad habits along the way. What I'm talking about now are the ones that are trying to avoid stuff. They're trying to avoid work and that kind of thing. Those are bad CNAs. If you're trying to avoid work all the time and it's the same work all the time, then yeah, you're not a very good CNA. And that happens a lot. I just did a video where, CNAs are leaving stuff all over the place in here. That's really bad habits. Mostly, there are some where it's not bad habits, it's just because they're lazy and they don't want to do their work or their job. But for the most part, it's just bad habits. They've gotten used to just putting stuff around, and I always say it's whatever's convenient for the CNA, which is kind of true. But that's because they've been doing this job for so long. They feel like the job becomes more important than why you're doing the job to begin with. I guess that's the best way to put it. Because the reason that they're doing, or at least I would hope, the reason they're doing the job to begin with is to help people. Now it gets to the point where that's really not what they're doing. The only people that they're helping that I've noticed, like that really good CNA, she talks to people all the time. But there are some CNAs that I would say they're middle of the road, they're mediocre or whatever. And the only time I see them become helpful is like when something is really happening, like somebody needs 911 called, a nurse says, hey, there's something going on, there's an emergency, then they hop to it. But see, any regular person on a highway would do that if there's a car accident or whatever. Or anybody in a school would do that, if one of the kids or two kids got into a fight. That's kind of normal for people to help other people. So you're really not doing anything. It's just that you might have more knowledge about what's going on with that person. But you're really not doing anything any more than any other person would do. Because everybody, for the most part, everybody will help when there's an emergency. You have to be in a situation where you want to be helpful and friendly, the whole Boy Scout thing, courteous, kind, well, etc. all the time, not just when there's an emergency, and the rest of the time be somebody nobody really wants to be around, or you're phoning it in, that kind of thing. Geez, how long is this video? Has this video gone on now? I think I'm gonna edit this down, and oh, it's less than an hour. I was planning on about an hour, but I think I'm gonna edit this down. I'll have to watch it back and see if how much sense it makes. But so let me get the whole check and change, not checking call lights. Almost all of them do that. And I think that's from being taught wrong, I think. The only thing is, every time I talk to somebody who's in management, they agree with me that they're not supposed to do that, that they're supposed to check call lights. They're supposed to, when they finish, and I've actually talked to CNAs, they said the same thing. That when they're doing a check and change, if they come out and see a call lights on, they're supposed to go in there. If that person needs to be changed, they change them and they go back to what they were doing. Because check and change is supposed to be only for people that don't tell them. So that's why they call it check and change, because they have to check these people. Well, someone like me, you don't have to check because you'll just ask me. I'll tell you. That's why you're supposed to be checking. And then when you have to go over here, this person tells you, you change them and you go back. That's the way it's supposed to go. But hardly any of them do that. They're like, I'm doing my rounds. What do you mean you're doing your rounds? It's, are they trying to sound like a doctor by saying I'm doing my rounds? Maybe that's what it is that makes them feel more important or something. Because really, they're making matters worse by doing it that way. Because if they would just go and do what they got to do with this person and go back to their check and change, this person wouldn't be sitting in their own filth for 2 hours, which has happened to me on multiple occasions. And then one time it happened, well, several times really. Yeah, but because I can't use the bathroom, I have to sit in this bed, Well, I have to sit in my own filth for however long it takes for a CNA to get around to changing me, right? Sometimes, like the other night, it took, I think it was 3 hours before anyone came in. And then by the time she came in, obviously, it had, you know, she had a lot more cleaning to do, let's say. And she had to, it was like partially dried paint, let's say, right? Because it took her so long to actually do her job. It made her job 10 times harder because she didn't do it when she should have, right? I mean, I've sat in my own filth for what's the longest? 13 hours before? I was here actually. Over in the other, I think I might have come close in River City Center, but it was like almost every night over there. Over here, it was like once that happened, so that was the difference. Over there, it was a lot. And it was usually on second and third shift. Over here, yeah, it was second and third shift too. But it happened a lot over there until I bitched about it so much that they finally started having, you could put your light on at, let's say, 10:30 at night, and nobody would come around to see why your light is on until like 6 the next morning, 5:30 maybe. And that's if there's actually somebody there. Because a lot of times there wasn't even anybody there. Either the person who was supposed to be working your wing was at another wing, yucking it up with their friends and doing their job over there, and never even bothering to do their job in your wing, or they weren't there at all. Sometimes they were out in the car in the parking lot sleeping, and they slept through the whole night. They'd get up for shift change, and that's it. Sometimes they'd go home and they wouldn't come back from lunch like 3 hours. I've heard of that. That was a nurse, actually. That was an LPN over at River City Center. Went they will have lunch and didn't come back for, I think it was 3 hours, 4 hours, something like that. It was at least three. And I was like, and I actually liked this nurse, and I was really surprised to find out she did that. But because she was the one that was supposed to be helping me, I forget if she was supposed to help the CNA or that if that CNA left and she had to take over for him. There was something. And somebody because the person who walked in the room was from another wing. And she happened to hear that my light was flashing for hours. And then came in. She's the one who told me about the nurse going home and sleeping. And I guess the CNA that was supposed to be working, she just decided she didn't want that job anymore and left. So, and that's happened many times. People just in the middle of a shift or after an hour or so, they just leave. There was one girl that left. She was working a night shift. I remember the night she worked, and she came in and she was just like death warmed over. She had fallen asleep in some break room or something, and then they had to do their rounds before shift change or something. And she was like, I can't take this. Well, she never worked another night again. I saw her on days, though. So it's not easy to do nights. A lot of people quit at night. It's hard for them to get people to work at night. They should be aware of that. That's what management's about. It's about knowing when you're going to have issues, and then you have to fill in. I've been here when the director of nursing and this girl that shouldn't work here anymore was up front. She works up front usually, was back here filling in. This was on a weekend, but that happened once. And then, like just the other day, what is it today? Tuesday? Yeah, it was like Saturday or Sunday. There was nobody here. So I didn't understand why that happened early on. I'm like, oh, well, at least, the people, they pull it out of their butt and they make it happen. Because there was her, a lot of hospice people filled in over here. Yeah, but I think Now that I think about it, what they were doing was filling in for the nurses when they couldn't have a nurse working on third shift. Yeah, that's what it was. It wasn't because of a CNA thing, it was because of the nurse thing. Because most of the people that work here are nurses also. But they happen to have office jobs. And when they need to, they have those people fill in for the nurses that work second or third shift, mostly third. And I've seen them do that for weeks at a time. All different people that work in the offices around here fill in. So it really wasn't a CNA thing. So some of the nurses that are actually management had CNAs come from up front to work back here because they didn't want to have to do it themselves. Although you got to hand it to the DON because she was actually, elbow deep in it. She was helping. She's probably about the only one actually, as far as nurses. Usually the nurses think they're above everything and they don't help. There was another office woman that helped, but she didn't help all the time. She just helped when it was really necessary, that kind of thing. But some of them, even as necessary as it is, they won't do anything. There are, like the other night, there have been nights. That was that. I miss. There have been nights where there's no CNA here. And then I'll have a nurse come in, or even a med tech come in and say, "Well, there is no CNA. I'll see what I can do. I'll try to find somebody," and leave, and you never see them again until the next shift. The next day or the next couple of days. You don't see them again, and you sit there in your own filth and wait. Well, nothing really is happening, and that med tech or that nurse is working in another part of the building or something, and you don't have a CNA. That situation happened where nurses have done that exact thing and come back 5 or 6 hours later. Well, I couldn't find a CNA, so I guess I have to change you, and they have to change me. Did kind of a bad job at it too, based on what the CNA said on the next shift. But that's all I can do is listen to what they said. But that only happened once, and that same nurse has also been one of the people that did nothing, and I now didn't see until the next time she worked, and that kind of thing. So it's like, I guess whatever they feel like doing, and that seems to be a common denominator. It's whatever they feel like doing. The CNAs, there are some that are in upper management that have more of a, they have more responsibility on themselves, I guess is the right way of putting it. So they will pitch in when they have to, when it's necessary. And then there are some that just won't. It doesn't matter. They're just not going to pitch in because they're above. There are a lot like that. And that goes for CNAs too. If, I wish I knew what the hell that girl said so I could talk about that too. But, I have no idea what she said. I can only guess, because there were other CNAs. That's the weird thing. There are other CNAs. There are CNAs here. One of the things that I thought was her problem was when back in at COVID, the COVID, I think it was just after COVID started. I got infections really bad in my legs, and a doctor was like, "Well, why do you have bad?" I had 4 different types of infections in my legs, and the doctor said, "What's that about?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, you're obviously scratching yourself. Why are you scratching?" He thought I was, digging at my legs or whatever. I said, "I don't know. I had no idea I was scratching myself." And that was because when I would use the bathroom and I'd go to, pull my pants up and leave or wash my hands or whatever, that I was scratching myself and didn't know it because I pulled my pants up and then the blood got soaked up by the pants. So I didn't really realize that that's what I was doing. And then because my fingers, I guess, were giving me infections. Now, at the time, I was an Uber driver, so I guess that's where I was getting them. Because I was taking showers and stuff, so I don't know at that time. So I don't know where the hell it came from. One of them was an infection that you can only get this at a medical facility, or and this is an odd thing, but or where they make compost. Those are the only two places where you can get this one infection. I forget what they called it. The only two places you can get it, period. You can't get it at a Walmart. You can't get it from somebody else, like staph. I had two different types of staph. And I had E. coli. Well, I mean, the staph, I have no idea, because I've had that before too. I have no idea where that comes from. I guess it's from, dirty countertops or something. I don't know what it's from. I've never heard anyone tell me where it really comes from. But E. coli, I thought that was something that was in plants or something, or maybe in like when you go to the bathroom, which is where I got one of these infections. I don't know. All I know is I had four different types of infections. The doctor told me because I have MS and like all of my skin is like, when you get Novocaine and you're coming out of it, and your face just feels funny. Like the outside is still numb, even though like part of it's numb, part of it's not, that kind of thing. That's the way I feel everywhere. So when I pick up, like, I can pick up something hot out of the oven. If I can grab it out of the oven, put it on top of the oven or stove or whatever you call those things, fast enough, I won't even feel the heat at all because of the numbness. It takes a minute for me to register that I'm touching something hot. And by the time I know that I'm touching something hot, I'm already burning it myself probably. Because the other day, what was that? Oh, a woman put a hot towel on me because she was washing me up. And it was, I guess they just fixed the hot water heater or something, but the water was really hot. She said, well, this towel's, on the hot side, which with your hands, it's a little different. You can do a little bit more. It's kind of like drinking hot coffee. You can drink hot coffee, but if you put your finger in it, it's hot. Well, that was kind of the same thing. When she put the hot towel on my chest, I'm like, oh, no big deal. Well, it took a while, like a few seconds before I realized, oh, that towel's pretty hot. That was hotter than it really should have been, but not hot enough to really burn me. It was very close, though. It was pretty hot, but I didn't feel it right away. It took like 10 seconds, 15 seconds of sitting. She just laid it on me for a little bit, and then I started to feel it after like 10, 15 seconds. I didn't feel anything at all before that. Want to talk about that? Here goes the MS again. Oh, the infections. So the doctor told me that because of that, I can't wash myself anymore. There's a long way around to come to this little part. But so I had to tell that now the CNAs over in River City, they never even asked me. They just did it. They just washed me up and changed me, did all that stuff. Never even asked me. That's the end of it anyway. So, in total darkness, I'll say like, subscribe, and comment. And if I don't like this video, I'll just make another one because I think I got off on a tangent, which is an MS thing a couple of times. So if it sounds all right, I'll put it up. It's supposed to be an editorial, not a vlog. So I'm supposed to be basically telling you what CNAs are like and stuff. So hopefully it came out like that. Otherwise, I'm going to be at this again. So like, comment, subscribe, and if you can afford to send me some crypto at cryptic.blockchain. Thank you very much.